Disappointment is sadly something that happens when it comes to certain video games, though it's even more likely when it comes to licensed video games. There are some bangers out there, the likes of Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor, but for every Shadow of Mordor, you have games like Masters of the Universe, He-Man Defender of Grayskull, which are awful and don't meet the expectations for a series that you love and adore. However, while Masters of the Universe is not a good game by any means of the imagination, there is still glimpses of joy and effort that shows the making of what could have been a good game, that allows for some form of gratification to be taken away from it even if it is a mess, saving it from being truly disappointing. Then there are those that are soulless, that brings nothing new to the table, feels cheap and lacks ambition. And within the case of licensed video games, feels like it was made simply to capitalize off the fandom it's based around, more so than anything else. I'm Pat Curdy from the Republic of Players, and today we'll be taking a look at Is It Wrong to Try to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon, Infinite Combate, and how it encapsulates the art of disappointment. Infinite Combate follows the narrative of the anime it is named after, where you get to play as Rookie Belle Cornell and the more experienced Alex Wallenstein. It covers the first season within the game and a small section of the first season of Sword Oratoria, which is a side story to the main series. Now the first question this brings up is why wasn't all of Season 1 of Sword Oratoria covered, and it feels weird that Season 2 of the main game isn't even touched, even though Infinite Combate came out after them. Now I can sorta forgive Season 2 not being included, the second series just wrapping up a month before the game came out in Japan, but Sword Oratoria's first season came out in 2017. It's mind-boggling that they didn't adapt the full season of it and only went halfway when Infinite Combate came out at the end of 2019 in Japan. It gives off a sense that this game was rushed out the door, yet it was delayed by over a year for its Japanese release. It begs the question of what was done with this extra time. It doesn't seem as if it was used at all. Looking at the visual novel aspect it gives to portray the story, they are flat. Each character has one drawn pose and one or two facial expressions, and it's just not captivating in the slightest. Taking a look at something like the Disgaea series, in its visual novel-like scenes, we get dynamic movement and more animated poses that go along with the voice actor's work. It helps pull you into the narrative and makes the characters in turn more expressive, as you can gain a greater understanding of them by simply being able to see these little bits of body movement. Now I'm not saying it needed to be on the same level as Disgaea, but giving them a little bit of movement instead of these stiff cardboard cutouts could have went a long way to injecting a molecule of life into the story instead of having this rather dull delivery that we were left with. The story itself is also presented in a strange way, as you switch between characters every few missions, but then halfway through, Eyes is dropped and the rest is you finishing off Belle's story. This is a small pet peeve in the grander scheme of things, but I feel like it's worth mentioning. They build up a structure by switching between the two, only to can it halfway, and it feels jarring to a certain extent. It's also obvious that this game takes a great deal of inspiration from the anime rather than the light novels, yet it only chooses to cover half of what it is adapting when it comes to where it gained its influence. Then there's the story itself. Now for those unfamiliar with Is It Wrong to Try to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon, gods have descended to the mortal realm to live among their children, and in doing so, they can grant them powers if they enter under a contract and join the gods' familia, giving people the capability to fight and slay monsters. That's the basic gist of it, and the game basically covers it, but the main meat of the story revolves around the growth of the characters, and Infinite Combate fails in this regard. They sprint through the story at a rather high speed that the narrative lacks any impact on the emotional or intense moments. It has all the story beats for it to be coherent, but lacks any sort of weight. By the time I finished the game, I honestly thought I had remembered the story of the anime wrong, that it wasn't anywhere near as good as I reminisced. So, I went back and watched the anime and it's fucking deadly. It hits emotionally, it feels fleshed out. Hell, the voice acting sounds so much better. But we are not here to discuss why Is It Wrong to Try to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon is a fucking deadly anime that tells the story better. That's a video for another day. Maybe. But upon watching the anime, it leaves the game feeling lackluster and begs the question of why play when there's a much greater medium to explore this story. The endgame does cover its own content, but it's mainly fan service or feels completely out of place for some of the characters, and it's not worth your time in my opinion. Now, I probably sounded like the narrative is bad, but in truth, it's unoffensive to a goddamn T. It's so middle of the road, the only word I could find in my limited vocabulary to describe it is disappointment. And we haven't even begun to discuss the gameplay. The gameplay is not fun, not even remotely, and oftentimes when a game isn't fun to play, I usually just stop. This has happened a few times with games for me, even ones that I adore everything else about. If the gameplay is not enjoyable in any sense, well, I can't bring myself to play it. Yet my love for this series made me want to see it through to the end, and I can be quite the ignorant individual at times, and even try my hand at doing some of the endgame stuff. Overall, the game is simplistic. You have an overhead view as you partake in some real-time combat, with a small number of moves while doing some dungeon crawling. You have light attacks and heavy attacks, and at the end of both you have a small period of time where you are vulnerable to attack. That was the most interesting aspect the game offered up to begin with. However, once you get on a little further in the game, while powering yourself up, soon you will be able to simply keep pressing the light attack as it will stun the enemies easily and your period of vulnerability will be shorter to the point of it not being long enough for foes to punish you. So basically, any skill that's really needed to play goes straight out the door at that point, with only boss battles being able to offer up some semblance of challenge. But even they're not that demanding of you. It doesn't help that none of it feels satisfying, with some enemies seemingly slipping away when you hit them, or even yourself, and this just makes everything feel like it lacks any energy. There are magic attacks which are ranged moves, yet you can easily miss due to the fact that aiming in this game can be ridiculously hard, and there's no lock-on button. It really makes it feel like a useless commodity that only works sometimes, and it's not even that effective. There's also ultimate moves which you can use as assists with the characters you bring along with you, as it's really their only purpose apart from a slight boost in certain areas like attack or stronger magic. The ultimates are kinda sad. They all do big-ish damage, and there's nothing majorly visually impressive or different about them either. It just feels tacked on. But the biggest issue I have with the gameplay is how similar Eyes and Bell play. There is no individuality to them. They play the same. There's nothing really unique at all. Their light and heavies the same. Their ultimates just let all their hits be critical for a short period of time, and if I'm being honest, it doesn't really do much extra damage. The lack of a difference between them makes the game grow tiresome quickly. There's nothing really to explore or dive deep into to pass a challenge. You have items you can use in a dungeon that can restore health, boost attack, cure poison, etc., which if you have a decent amount will cover you for any slip up you make, reducing the challenge even further. And then there's the sad excuse of a weapon and upgrade system that is so basic yet does so little to affect damage output or anything for that matter of fact. The changes it adds are so minuscule that is hardly noticeable at all. They have elemental types which you can add to your weapons which are practically useless. They allow you to level up your weapon, though it never feels like it got stronger. You can upgrade characters, which is probably where you will notice the only sort of change, as you will gain more health and speed, yet it's not that big of an improvement in my eyes. It feels like you're growing at a snail's pace. What is offered gameplay wise is just so stale, yet it's perfectly serviceable. The game functions, but there's nothing engaging, nothing that makes you want to come back for another go. You will have seen what this game has to offer pretty quickly, and it's simply doing that constantly with no sense of satisfaction. It left me feeling bored out of my mind, and I couldn't help but be exceptionally disappointed. The game is relatively short, and one could easily plow through it, especially if you decide to skip over the side quests which add little to nothing, but adding more experience and money to upgrade characters and weapons. Then there's the endgame content. You're going into the same dungeons as before, just going through more floors without stopping, with more enemies being thrown at you. So rather than trying to make the game challenging, it's simply trying to overwhelm you. It is grindy as hell if you want to gain the new story content between all the characters, and with how soul-sucking the gameplay is, I didn't feel it was worth the effort exerted, particularly after I saw the little interactions it unlocked. They really didn't do anything for me, and couldn't pique my interest in the slightest to keep on going to see where they lead. This game does not look visually appealing. In fact, the first time I saw Belle's 3D model, I was a little taken aback as it just didn't really capture his appearance well. You can still tell it's him, but that's more so down to his colour scheme. The models feel like minimalistic work was done on them, but just given enough shape to distinguish the chibi character designs. The dungeons you explore are not very interesting and look like something that could have possibly came from a PS2 game. And it's just not a game that's pleasing to the eye. The 2D artwork is pretty, which is one of the few pluses I can give this game. But it's nothing outstanding or eye-catching enough compared to other games out there. The music is just fine. There are a few catchy ones that are pretty darn good and worth a listen, with its more upbeat pub-like music that feels like it comes out of some medieval fantasy, but most blended into the game and went unnoticed by me completely. Like when I went to listen to the soundtrack itself, I remembered barely any of them, not even a glint of recognition passed me as I listened to it. And it's a bit of a shame, because as I have said, some of the music is great, but overall it's just not invigorating enough. Or perhaps the gameplay simply deflated me so much, I really couldn't bring myself to care about this game, and simply missed out on the music unconsciously. Is it wrong to try to pick up girls in a dungeon? Infinite Combate is just disappointing. And I'll admit, this is coming from a biased perspective as I loved the animated series. But if this had been my first introduction to the series as a whole, I don't think I would have ever given the franchise a second chance. I can't find many redeeming qualities about this game, but also there's no real main grievances to take away. Sure, the story feels rushed and in turn lacks any impact. Sure, the combat is duller than Dishwater, and the RPG elements and dungeon crawling are even more so. But it works. It's not very compelling in any shape or form, but it functions. It feels unimaginative, that only the minimum required thought was put into the making of this game, and that it would sell on its name alone. It sure as hell worked on me. I picked this baby up as soon as I could get it. This seems to be the sad fate of licensed games though, preying on the fanbase with a poor effort of a game that will leave one disappointed. I want to like this game, I do, but I can't. I don't hate this game, and I dare not even say it's okay. It's hollow, and captures the true essence of disappointment for me. It's probably specially true due to my expectations I had. I was hoping it would capture some sense of the anime, the excitement of a fight, the emotional highs the characters go through, seeing the great chemistry of characters bouncing off each other. And none of it's there. And this is why I'm disappointed. It's just so plain compared to how I know the series. It hasn't lived up to what came before. I couldn't find a speck of something that could have made this game great, let alone good. It's just so bog standard. Will we ever see a good Is It Wrong to Try to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon game for consoles? Who knows? But if you're like me and really want a good game to play from this series, your best bet is the mobile game, which is such a good experience and made my expectations far too high for Infinite Combate. Now comes the time where I beg. If you like this video, please do subscribe, like and comment. It helps. I think. I don't know. YouTube is a weird place and I don't think anyone knows how it really works. I've been Pat Carey from the Republic of Players, and until next time, have a good one.